Kushan Kingdom. From 30 CE to 375 CE, the Kushan Kingdom, with its power base beyond the Khyber Pass and modern Afghanistan, became the dominant political force in northern India in the centuries immediately after the fall of the Mauryas. Sitting astride the main trade routes across the northern half of the subcontinent, the Kushans thrived on the commerce that passed through the area. Again, we see the Kushan Kingdom and the Silk Road. The Kushan Kingdom was right there, pretty much around the entire trade of the Silk Road. After the collapse of the Mauryan Empire, a new state formed by recent migrants from the north, and there arose north of the Indus River Valley. For the next 4 centuries, the Kushan Kingdom played a major role in regional trade via the Silk Road until it declined in the 3rd century CE. The bulk of the trade of the Silk Road was between the Roman Empire and China, and was transported along the route now known as the Silk Road, one segment of which passed through the mountains of northwest of India. From there, goods were shipped to Rome through the Persian Gulf or the Red Sea. Trade between India and Europe had begun even before the rise of the Roman Empire, but it expanded rapidly in the 1st century CE when sailors mastered the pattern of the monsoon winds in the Indian Ocean from the southwest in the summer and the northeast in the winter, of course. Commerce between the Mediterranean and the Indian Ocean, as described in the Periplus, a 1st century CE account by a Greek merchant which we have explored earlier, was extensive and often profitable, and it resulted in the establishment of several small trading settlements along the Indian coast. The Roman Empire had imported ivory, indigo, textiles, precious stones, and pepper from India, and silk from China. The Romans sometimes paid cash for these goods, but also exported silver, wine, perfume, slaves, and glass, as well as cloth from Egypt. Overall, Rome appears to have imported much more than it sold to the Far East, and so Rome had more imports than it did exports at this time in relation to the Far East. The Silk Road was a conduit not only of material goods, but also of technology and of ideas. The first Indian monks to visit China, for example, may have traveled over the road during the 2nd century CE. But by the time of Fa Xian, Buddhist monks from China were beginning to arrive in increasing numbers to visit holy sites in India. The visits not only enriched the study of Buddhism in the 2 countries, but also led to a fruitful exchange of ideas and technological advances in astronomy, mathematics, and linguistics. According to one scholar, the importation of Buddhist writings from India encouraged the development of printing in China, while the Chinese obtained lessons in healthcare from monks returned from the Asian subcontinent. Indeed, the emergence of the Kushan Kingdom as a major commercial power was due not only to its role as an intermediary in the Rome-China trade, but also to the rising popularity of Buddhism. During the 2nd century CE, Kanishka, the greatest ruler of the Kushan monarchs, began to patronize Buddhism. Under Kanishka and his successors, an intimate and mutually beneficial relationship was established between Buddhist monasteries and the local merchant community in thriving urban centers like Taxila and Varanasi. Merchants were eager to build stupas and donate money to monasteries in return to social prestige and the implied promise of a better life in this world or the hereafter. Again, that greatest ruler of the Kushan monarchs was Kanishka. For their part, the wealthy monasteries ceased to be simple communities where monks could find a refuge from the material cares of the world. Instead, they became major consumers of luxury goods provided by their affluent patrons. Monasteries and their inhabitants became increasingly involved in the economic life of society, and Buddhist architecture began to be richly decorated with precious stones and glass purchased from local merchants or imported from abroad. The process was very similar to changes that would occur later in Europe in the Christian church of the medieval times. It was from the Kushan Kingdom that Buddhism began its long journey across the wastes of Central Asia to China and other societies in Eastern Asia. As trade between the two regions increased, merchants and missionaries flowed from Bactria over the trade routes snaking through the mountains towards the northeast. At various stopping points on the trail, pilgrims erected statues and decorated mountain caves with magnificent frescoes depicting the life of the Buddha and his message to his followers. One of the most prominent of these centers was at Bamiyan, not far from modern-day Kabul, where believers carved 2 mammoth statues of the Buddha out of a sheer sandstone cliff. According to the Chinese pilgrim Fa Xian, when he visited the area in the year 400 CE, more than 1,000 monks were attending a religious ceremony at the site. And in the next reading, we will go over India after the Mauryas, and India after the Maurya dynasty and the Mauryan Empire. We will then go over to the Gupta dynasty, a new golden age for India, the Gupta Empire.